So we appreciate you guys coming out this morning. So before we get into the questions, just quickly, so folks who are both online as well as the folks in the room really understand kind of where you sit in the broader organization. You can start there and just talk a little bit about that and where you and Chris sit.
Sure. Hey, good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for coming out. We are the tech policy office at the White House. I think is the easiest.
Oh, why don't we just turn them off, and that way we don't get any reverb. That'll be fine. Everything to us.
Great. Hello. So we're the tech policy office at the White House, and what we do is work on both designing policy that is executable at agencies. So one of the things that we've been really focused on in the last couple of years is if you write policy and you have not had done your user research or had the experience of actually delivering at an agency, it's incredibly challenging to understand the second and third order consequences of your policy. So you can be maybe kind of erudite and pedantic and say, thou shalt do these things, and your policy lands and no one can execute on it. And that's a real failure of policy. So one of the things that we've really been focused on is making sure that we're taking an executive order from the president, legislation that is needs to have additional guidance, and focus on that so that we can deliver a better experience for the American people by delivering better at agencies.
Yeah, and so I'll just quickly add, from the cyber end of it, we've been pretty busy executing EO 14028, but as Claire mentioned, it's all these are they're new mandates, new requirements sitting on top of requirements that have been there for a while, and so a lot of this is about like how do you do good prioritization, do you help agencies find the best, most efficient investments, most impact, while achieving the goals that you laid out in your policy, and so. A lot of it is just smartly aligning resources, ensuring strong implementation plans with each agency that are kind of tailored around their needs and their realities, because they're also all across the board. So it's a lift all ships, but understanding that you're lifting lots of different types and sizes of ships, and you kind of have to have different approaches to that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because again, the audience here has different understanding of how it all works together. So people reading the newspaper, we've got TTS, people reading the newspaper, we've got USDS, people reading the newspaper, we've got OMB, we've got people providing digital solutions, we've got security folks over at CISO. How I know how it works. I look at you guys as kind of quarterbacks, but I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on how you kind of lead the group in the direction.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And it took me quite a bit of time actually coming into the environment and understanding it, frankly. At the Office of Management and Budget, we work with our budget colleagues across the entire federal government. So over 400 federal agencies and bureaus. And we work really closely with the U.S. Digital Service and with GSA's TTS. But we start at the administration's priorities, right? That is kind of the focal point of what we attempt to work together across the environment to execute. So that also includes an enormous amount of security work, right? Working with our colleagues at CISO, working with the Office of the National Cyber Director. Chris is dual-hatted to the Office of the National Cyber Director so that we look at everything we're trying to accomplish as a team sport, right? There is not one of us that is leading the charge on these efforts. It is really all of us working together collaboratively, making sure that we can not only execute, but we can sustain the execution. Because just getting something live or putting out guidance doesn't mean we're actually going to drive the impact, the measurable impact that is absolutely necessary for us to drive sustained change and then move towards digital transformation.
Yeah, and so focusing explicitly on the cyber piece of that question, Ross, we're putting out strategy, policy, how performance measurement, aligning resources, right? That those are the main roles in the executive office of the president lane. I am dual hatted into the newly created Office of National Cyber Director in large part just to ensure that as that stands up, what we've been doing for years in OMB is fused and is like one. And that's been working really well. Because as National Cyber Director goes out as national things, kind of like we're ensuring that all those lessons learned across like how that's happening. You know, I'm in all those leadership meetings. I'm in all of these like fora inside ONCD, and so we're connected to, and so is the team that's supporting both sides of that. So I think that's like one of the ways that we've been dealing with that. But then, you know, CISA, just to kind of clean line that, right? Like I think of when CISA's got a lot of roles, okay? When I think of their federal role, I think I'm largely like a managed service provider, security service provider, backstopping the entire federal civilian agencies. That's an operational role, service delivery, tooling delivery, you know, before and after incidents. But, you know, we're not like getting as operational unless it may be a major incident or something like that. We'll all fuse together and kind of ensure that we're getting the right resources around those big events. But by and large, the day-to-day, it's just like it's a policy operational cut line. Right. And that's kind of like how, but we're working together as one team and constant coordinating everything.
Thank you. That's a helpful setting. Now let's talk about the work itself. What right now we've all been paying attention to what you all have put out. And there's a lot of policy coming out, but can you help set up what are the main thrusts of what you're working on right now broadly?
Yeah, it's a pretty broad portfolio, starting with the fundamentals, right? Constantly interrogating IT modernization efforts, high value assets, you know, how are we operating the government and are we doing it at a level of excellence safely and securely? So kind of start there. Then we are working on all of the things that we've been talking about in this conference, right? AI is a completely different narrative that has changed pretty rapidly. So focusing on that. Fundamentals like identity, right? We are constantly working in those areas and have brought on some subject matter experts on our team to actually help us both inform the strategy and then think a little bit forward leaning towards the guidance that we are. Customer experience is really digital experience, right? That is, you know, customer experience to me is a little bit more of the forward-leaning touch to the actual end customer, but digital experience is our entire ecosystem, how we're able to actually deliver services that can, again, be sustained, but also that work internally for the business processes that we have to reinterrogate. So just like moving to the cloud, you don't just lift and shift all of your assets and throw them in the cloud, right? You have to go through a rigorous business process reengineering so that you are thinking about how these new tools work and how you can streamline your process in order to take best advantage of it. So digital experience to me is a little bit of a broader category because it does take in some of that business process work that we need to do, as well as actually touching the end customer with a better customer experience.
Yeah, and you know, and so a big part of this, right, is modernizing security practices of the federal government. The primary driver that's been sitting behind all of our efforts there was EO 14028, as I already mentioned. But what that did was it set into motion all sorts of policy directives that we then issued after that, strategies like the zero trust strategy, secure software development practices, you know, ensuring we have better logging and incident response and detection capabilities across the entire federal government. And so we've had a lot of impetus in that area that is kind of concretely and directly driven from these policies. And so it's just been a lot of it's just kind of getting into the implementation layer of all that and sort of meeting the world where it is and being agile around it. And, you know, for example, you know, we'll be putting out a common attestation form for secure software development practices, probably later this week when the Federal Register is going to post that. Like that's really rubber meeting the road, right? It's like taking that policy and then like we'll test it with the world and see if we got it right and kind of be agile and continue to develop it. So it's, you know, it's really just been there's been a lot of distance I read.
Thank you both. So now that you guys have laid the groundwork, help me understand some of the ways that you're thinking about the digital experience and cybersecurity in all of the various policy implementations and permutations, right? How do you incorporate it into the policy development process? And then how do you loop in the departments and agencies into that policy development process, right? So we were talking about some of the pillars that you're driving. How does that work its way in?
That's a big question with lots of component pieces. So maybe just to simplify a little bit, ultimately it is our responsibility to deliver a simple, seamless, and secure experience to the American people. Kind of full stop. And then as you go through the stack of what is required to do that, I'm very fortunate in my private sector experience. I never delivered a product that I didn't have, security engineers on the team from the beginning.
Right.
Like we just never decoupled security from product development. And so I think bringing that into government and making sure we're asking those questions and building those teams and bringing other, again, private sector concepts like a product manager, which is really different than a project manager or a program manager. And having those roles in the policy development side actually helps us write better policy. So making sure that we're thinking holistically about the policy all the way through implementation, and then the technical strategy that we're going to execute in order to be able to deliver. So it's lots of different pieces, the numerators and denominators of it, but it is really what the private sector has been doing for many, many years. And I think bringing a lot of those best practices into government and recognizing that government is a little bit different, both in the way that we design systems, but also the skill sets that we currently have building products, which is why we need really effective partnerships with the private sector to be able to constantly bring in that way of thinking, those lines of interrogation so that we're making the right decisions.
Right, and on the security end of that, it's a huge culture change, I think, in the industry, but also particularly in government to kind of have a security product rollout mentality that when you're delivering a new security capability, if you're not thinking about how it's impacting the users, if you're not thinking about what type of customer experience they're going to have, it's going to kind of continue to end in frustration, I think, for the security teams. And so, by design, like we're, in part through leadership and just direction and constant reinforcement, when everything we do, it's sort of designed into it, where we're being very clear that like that's our expectation that people are thinking about these things during rollouts. And so in like the zero trust journey, for example, there's going to be a lot of that, big changes that have interactions with humans. Mm-hmm. And so if you're changing how they work, you have to have that built in. And so having program management offices with the right types of skill sets on those programs and thinking smart about like, well, we don't have enough security professionals. Like, well, who can you, like, who else from the IT and digital delivery world can you sort of bring in and make a security specialist and kind of help you get that design right? Like that's like a lot of where we've been pushing, Ross, but look, it's going to take some time because I think just traditionally that's not the way security is, more of like a mandate. And like we've got, if everything needs to be secure, that's not really fair.
No, that's refreshing to hear, right? And part of the reason we want to have this conversation is to give you all the opportunity to voice that publicly, right? Like the government in many cases, as you take that approach, is going to lead the way. But you all, like we said at the beginning, are at the pointy tip of the policy sphere. And you've got a lot of agency customers and a lot of agency partners that are working with you to implement those policies. Help me understand, where does the policy line and the implementation line begin? How are you fusing and bringing in and working with the federal CIOs and the federal CISO councils, and who owns the policy, who owns the implementation, and how are you guys part? Talk to me a little bit about how you get it done, basically. You want
me to start with the use case? I mean, so a good example of how we get it done. Maybe I'll just get back to the zero trust strategy implementation, right? So like there was a very intentional design decision that we made when we rolled that out. Right? We said we've got to get everybody in a common roadmap across common capability areas, specific 3-year timeline. It's an action plan. But we also understand that if you made every requirement that is a hard requirement in a policy, doing specific due date, you're not going to get it quite right. Like you can do that for some things, but others, you need to understand you're driving into the middle of multiple procurements that are like in train, projects that are in train and being implemented.
Yeah.
You don't want to disrupt good progress that aligns to it. So if it's like somewhere else in the strategy and you picked the wrong date and now you're setting it off track. It's like what we did was we said there's a lot more work. It was worth it. We said, everybody, you need to do implementation plans. There are 3-year implementation plans and get back to us and like how that's going to go. Then Claire and I would engage CIOs and CISOs directly to ensure that they were buying in and knew what the plan was and it was coming from them, not just a lower level kind of like, here's what we think. It had to be like we had to believe that it was like a real implementation plan. And what's funny is we got like 65 of those back. There's only 24 CFO Act agencies. We generally require these types of things from the CFO Acts because others don't have a lot of resources.
Right.
You look at that signal, like over 40 others saying we want to get your feedback on an implementation plan for this modernization strategy that we're trying to implement. That was kind of exciting. And that's like one way for us, it's like one example of how we're sort of rubber meeting the road and like, trying to move forward on some goals, but being agile and flexible in how we do it.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty perfectly, Chris. It is really a collaborative effort, making sure that the CIOs and the CISOs have a seat at the table, but a real voice in the room, right? That we are adjusting based on their on the ground feedback. And I think that Zero Trust is a really great example of that.
So let me ask you, there are 2 directions we're going to go here. One is metrics. How are you leveraging the metrics process to do this? And the other is budget. And I think the budget's a little bit longer because we know as you develop a 3-year implementation plan, how do you develop how do you pay for it, right? So let's start with the metrics first. You have FSMA. You are beholden to FSMA.
Yeah.
FITARA is still driving a lot of what you do. How are you taking the existing processes that are, some would say flexible, some would say they need a little bit of an update, and how are you leveraging what you've got currently to measure successfully the implementation of the agency?
Yeah, for sure. FSMA or FITARA?
FSMA
first.
All right.
Okay, so so Information Security Modernization Act, right? So this is our core authority 2014 for managing cybersecurity largely, and like it requires performance metrics. So we collect performance metrics on a quarterly basis. Is the punchline. And what we do is like every year we try to keep fairly consistent. Usually in the beginning of administration, you come out hard with like a new set. But you say, hey, maybe there's some stuff from last administration that look good. But we got our whole new agenda. We got a whole new, processes, policies that we need to track and see how we're doing. So you set a new baseline. So a lot of what is in FSMA is just all surrounding EO 140 implementation, all of our priorities. They're all basically pinned around the Zero Trust strategy. And so there's some explicit things in there that are just like driving for outcomes on MFA, on strong MFA, on encryption, transit at rest, endpoint detection response coverage. It's like there's a whole list of all of the sort of things that are inside the strategy. We're ensuring that we're tracking explicit progress over time on a quarterly basis. But one of the other things that we tried, and I will admit that it's actually been a bit harder than I thought, because look, I get the instinct of most folks out in the world of like, tell us how you're doing on something and how you're getting better. We just want to know the upward trend of progress and like make us feel better about doing better in cybersecurity. I think SolarWinds moment sort of is a pretty big gut punch of like, well, we thought we were on an upward trend and now we just had like this really, really devastating incident that impacted a wide swath. Maybe like we'll continue to track progress on those things, but we also need to get granular and dive deep into understanding and getting key insights behind the capabilities that are stopping bad guys the most. And like trying to do those 2 things at once has been a little tricky, because you have a group of people that aren't used to that. They just want to see, is it green? Is it going up? And it's like, I don't know. Sometimes you need to just dissect why it's not going anywhere, or that you might have been wrong about it going up, and dig into it, find out why. So a lot of what we've been doing with FSMA is like, where are the hard use cases on MFA implementation? Why have we been sitting at a kind of relative area of progress for a decade? And like, how do we get across those last miles? of implementation? Are there policy interventions? Like, what is going on? What do you do? It's like, that's like a lot of how we've been thinking about like key insights behind some of the data.
Yeah, and then just adding in Fatara, you know, I'm a US Digital Service alumni, and one of our, core statements is optimize for results, not optics. And there's a lot of optimization for optics when you're just, red, yellow, green.
Yeah.
And that is just the framework that you're using. I think Fatara has been really meaningful in the digital ecosystem, and I can see the committee is constantly striving to modernize. There was, I believe the number somewhere in the $6 billion range of savings for data center optimization that has occurred over time. And that is a really great example of measuring something very specific and showing outcomes. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to think. But when you're thinking about digital transformation and cybersecurity, there are other metrics that we need to think about as we are measuring success. And I think we are working, closely with the committee and continuing to listen to CIOs and CISOs to understand what they think is important from a measurement perspective, so that we can continue to evolve Fatara to be as important kind of going up the chain in an agency. It gets attention at a higher level. It is not just an activity that CIOs are accomplishing. It really is something that is in the leadership mindset and is reported on publicly. And I think that drives a lot of action in agencies.
That's great. And I think one of the things that from an industry perspective, we really are hopeful around is seeing the evolution of the metrics as you work with the CIOs and CISOs to really update them to reflect some of the modernization efforts in a more granular fashion, right? And that's what we're encouraged to hear you guys are working. All right, let's switch to money, because this is stuff. You guys came in and have laid out a pretty fantastic agenda from our perspective, right? We really support modernization, digital experience, customer experience, zero trust. We're very, very big fans. Unfortunately, you guys don't have the congressional power of the purse to underpin it right away. That said, we've seen some evolution over FY23 to respond to some of that. We've seen agencies ask for money, whether it's for zero trust or for modernization costs. Help me understand the landscape of funding. I know you put out a report about some of the different funds are out there, but help us understand what funds are available to agencies, how they're planning and budgeting for this. Do you expect to see more asks to align more with policies going forward? Just walk us through it a little bit.
Budget, right? It all comes down to the money and how we are being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar and driving the impact that is necessary for us to go through the transformation. So, the demand signals are huge, right? We are working on systems that are old and antiquated in some instances. And I think the biggest transformation that I have seen in the last year is the play that we did for the FY24 budget with the National Cyber Director, at the time, Chris Inglis, doing a joint memo with OMB Director Shalonda Young, focusing on cybersecurity investments. That exhibit, we worked very collaboratively across OMB as one team focusing. We were able to listen to our CISOs and CIOs of the ground truth at their agencies. Budget, it does not always, when I was a CIO sitting at an agency, my budget needs were not necessarily, they were understood at the agency. They didn't always get out the door in the exact same way that I was asking for them. And so being able to work really collaboratively across OMB with our budget colleagues, I think has been the biggest transformation that we have gone through in our office. And we are going to continue to drive that collaboration because we're all trying to solve the same problems. Right. And it doesn't make sense that we are, over here advocating for dollars to be spent when a team can't actually execute on it on the ground. So harmonizing those two things together, making sure that the teams can actually spend the money efficiently, is also part of our job. And I think that we've really leaned into that in the last year. And I think the next coming into spring guidance and the next budget cycle, we're going to continue to improve on that.
That's great.
Totally. And there's some really good outcomes on the cyber and like the 22 to 23, we increased the request by 1.2 billion, 23, 24, we increased the federal cybersecurity civilian request by another 1.5 billion. And, but one of the ways we did that is we really did strategy-based budget. We've had a strategy. We've been able to do data calls around that and get pretty good granularity around like, are these matching our budget requests and matching our priorities? And for the first time this year in the 24 budget, we were able to release a zero trust funding number. And in the BN, it was 5.5 or 5.8 billion, for zero trust spend. And you can track like that up and over, and it's now permeated across all the agencies where they have those line items and they kind of like understand what's behind them, what capabilities all the way down to tooling layers and back up. So I think that what that's helped us do is just give confidence to the budget side that like there's data, there's some data here.
That's great.
That's saying this is the right thing. And also if you ask a question, get lots of good questions like, but how do you know this is the right spend? It's like, well, we wrote a strategy with the private sector and it's kind of had the best minds in the nation on it. It's what we've got. It's a 3-year plan. It's a pretty good thing to pick around, and it's a pretty decent answer. When you can say like, we got a strategy and there's some data showing that like we're implementing it. That's the resource management officers need that because they're balancing all of these requests. And like, if you can't make it sort of easy and trustable, it's kind of hard sell to just say we just need more money, and so I think that's one of the ways we've been successful together with the budget side.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the areas, because it takes a year or two in some cases to catch up, right? I mean, we're looking at 2024. Who knows how that's going to play out? I mean, I can say that because we're watching, but you're sitting right now in a room with folks who are passionate about partnering with federal agencies to get the mission done, right? They want to partner with agencies. They want to solve the problems. They want to do zero trust. They want to deliver modern cloud-based solutions that allow for that user experience. Tell me a little bit about how you guys have evolved the TMF. What other funds are available to agencies who have projects that are ready to go now, but just may not have had a chance to build it in their budget yet?
Yeah, I'll hit a little bit on TMF. I'm the chairman of the board of the Technology Modernization Fund. It has been in existence for 5 years. Previously had several $100 million of funding. With the American Rescue Plan, we were given $1 billion. And so what we did is we actually completely designed a different structure. So when I joined in my role, we were able to we had a 2 or 3 person financial management function at GSA, and we have designed the TMF process to be like we would assess something in best practices in the private sector. We brought technologists on board. We're actually interrogating the proposals from a technical perspective, as well as change management, procurement, acquisition, all of the component pieces that drive success at a federal agency. So we had over, I believe it's over $3.5 billion in demand signal coming from the federal environment. We currently have 24 agencies that have, I believe it's 70 programs in process against that American Rescue Plan dollar. So that is a fund that is available. And when ARP passed, we kind of did a bottoms up. People came to the takeout window. We did this rigorous process and we approved projects and they started. So all of those that are in flight, we are also doing top down. Right? What are our high value assets? What are the technical systems that are at greatest risk in the federal government, and trying to actually drive that from the top down as well. So I think it's a combination of TMF being, kind of the ice cream sandwich of funding. We still have a lot of funding available, and we are working through proposals on a weekly basis to be able to get funding out. But it does require partnership between the agencies, being able to write a really good proposal and be able to think through what their issues are for us to be, for the board, and Chris, a board member as well, to be able to approve the funding. We also recognize there are a lot of agencies that have a problem that's known, and they don't have the team at the agency capable of actually writing a strategic plan that would address, or they might have a technical gap or a security gap. So we're also looking at some micro grants, planning grants that might be able to help those agencies get a foundational capability, either through GSA, TMF, 18F, TTS,
Yep.
USDS, all the acronyms, to be able to help them write the best proposal that has the highest chance of actually being implemented with excellence.
Yeah, and so TMS is a phenomenal example, but there's no replacement for the annual budget process. And I'll be honest with you, Russ, we look at the 24 cycle, I'm a little worried when I hear talk about potentially cutting cyber dollars back to 22 levels. I mean, I hope everybody's paying attention to that, because we've done really hard work to say we need an extra $2.7 billion of data to move the federal government forward, to be able to secure ourselves from serious adversaries, Russians, others, serious nation states who are trying to do harm to federal systems and data. And, we can't go backwards. We've got to continue to plow forward and sustain these investments that we've asked for in 24. And so I think, I am a bit concerned about that right now.
So I appreciate that. And I want to double down on a couple of things you said, and I want to ask for a bit of clarification. So one, totally agree. We need to make sure that we are robustly funding all of the above. Modernization, cybersecurity, separate dollars, all of the above. And that's one of the things that ADI does as well. We advocate aggressively to help agencies fully fund their requests. I want to ask for some clarification around the TMF. And I know you guys put out clear guidance. I've read the website. It's well written. Can you articulate what the repayment looks like, and how? I mean, what does it mean when you say you have to repay it? What are we looking at as form of repayment? I know there's some flexibility around cyber. So if you could just top line clarify that a little bit, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, full repayment is the model that TMF was built on. But with the emergency COVID and solar winds appropriation for the American Rescue Plan, we worked collaboratively across government to minimize, to have a reduction scale in repayment. So there's a baseline that we legally need to meet, which is, between 5 and 10% to keep the fund solvent. But we look at every single investment based on what the agency's ability is to repay. So flexibility, we have a lot of cyber projects that have come in that were so urgent that we went to minimum repayment to speed the process to actually be able to deal with the threat environment that we're operating in. So there is a full scale. It is not full repayment in every instance, but and especially related to the cybersecurity project, we are absolutely open. The minimum repayment is a baseline, but we are really being agile and leaning into what agencies need to be able to be as effective as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. So, and one clarification for you, Chris. There was we're excited about the money being data backed for the billions for zero trust. Is that number? How would you? What would you call that in the president's budget? Is it a cybersecurity number? Is it a broader IT modernization number that's built into that? Like, how would you say? Where would you say we could find zero trust budget broadly?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, I mean, we kind of categorized. Look, I mean, not every cybersecurity investment in an agency is going to be a zero trust investment, right? And so, but I think what we learned through the process by looking at the data and the numbers in the end is it's about half. We use the cybersecurity framework within the CSF as another framework for the rest of the spend, so that we can have frameworks and ways of capturing and budgeting all of this. And just as what we learned when we did this exercise was how much of that overall 12 billion plus that we were asking for in 24, how much of that were tied explicitly directly to capabilities that we're driving for inside the virtual strategy that we laid out, right?
Yeah.
And that number is like 5.5, 5.8. So we're sort of just under half of the overall federal civilian costs. And again, I'm also leaving out the DoD and IC side of this. So if you look at the whole government pie, it's actually like more like double that even, but just the federal civilian side of us.
That's great. Thank you. So I've got a couple more minutes and we're going to open it up to folks here for questions. I want to talk future focused, right? So there's a couple areas I want to touch on. Cyber, and then the buzzword of the conference, AI, right? So, but you guys, I think, are sitting in a unique place because you all can be leaders in ways that we're addressing this from a policy perspective. So let's start with cyber first, because I think you've talked about this a little bit, but just to put a finer point on it, we've heard that your office is concerned about memory safety as a potential area to address going forward. Are you guys looking at it? What should we as a vendor community be thinking about as you're contemplating that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool that we have a national strategy that's talking about like memory safe languages, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, maybe in this room we think it's cool. And I think that's exciting. But it's part of this broader like secure design rubric, right? I mean, that is like one of the things that we can make big impact if we just really focus on starting to use memory safe language encoding. And but it's also around everything else in that space that we're looking at. Secure application development practices, whether it's like having sound testing throughout the application development lifecycle, like we're having vulnerability disclosure programs that work that are kind of like picking the stuff up that you missed. So being open to that and like leaning into some of the challenges of doing it and building out and figuring out how to have software bill of materials and like integrate that into these programs and vulnerability management. So that's kind of my answer to like memory safe language. It's like that's a key thing. So are some of these others where I think if we move forward and generally the industry is pretty aligned on this.
Yep.
But look, I mean, when you look at SMOMs in particular, you're just, and you look at the common attestation form for software development practices, we're starting to see kind of how hard this is going to be, actually. Like that you have open source code for years. It's sort of like been built on and 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 built on. Now we're talking about trying to understand that. Okay. I mean, that's something people haven't tried to do yet, right? So like we shouldn't underestimate that we're taking on a really big rock. But I think we all sort of recognize and realize it's like if we don't change some of these practices that started out the way they started out, sort of a little bit less formal. I mean, this is underpinning global business now. Well, I don't think it's appropriate to have an informal way of doing business. Like, I mean, some of it's going to be a transition phase. We've got to get a bit more rigorous in sort of how we do this because we've made it too hard on ourselves a bit to be able to manage the risks. And we've got to simplify everything to find a forward path.
Great. So AI, I'll tell you, I mean, there's a ton of questions out there, right? We are hearing some forward-leaning agencies have mused privately, hey, maybe I should use ChatGPT to do some stuff. We've heard, is this something that we should ban expressly? We've heard folks from kind of a national security perspective say we have to double down on AI investment. And I think there's conflation between things like AI built into products and use of large language models. So walk us through kind of how you're approaching this topic broadly and where you think the administration may be going forward.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. Obviously, we could, sit here and invite subject matter experts in for the next 25 hours and not touch the tip of this. But I think the way that I think about it is I'm thinking about the opportunity, right? The opportunity of AI. So think about the ecosystem. Most people interact with the government. They come to accomplish a task, right? You don't come to hang out on government websites and like browse around for fun. So you're trying to accomplish a task. You usually start at an external search engine, right? To get an answer to your question. So if you search, how do I apply for Medicare? You get 260 million answers to that question, which is maybe a couple too many, right? You need one answer that is the right answer. You don't need a million answers. So we are actually looking at this as an incredible opportunity for the federal government to be focusing on one answer to your question. So if you just take the top 6 agencies that encompass 80% of all the transactions in government, and you just start with the top 100 questions that people are asking those agencies, you can actually start to use AI in an incredibly powerful way to deliver better services to the American public. If you add on to that, consistent branding. So as you're navigating from one website to another, that you feel that it is trusted, verified, that you know you're interacting with a US government website that can be trusted. Really important. And then I think the third part is ultimately we will be narrowing down our user experience to focus on you as the end user and have one account, right? I might have information at Social Security. I have information at the VA. I have information at the IRS. We hopefully will develop something in the future that is using APIs from all of those agencies, but putting it in a frame about you. Right? These are our expectations that we have of private sector companies, and we have those expectations of the public sector that we're helping manage. So I'm actually super optimistic because I do think AI is going to help us leapfrog, right? That if we just start at the sedimentary layer of 15 years of government content, and we just keep writing more content on top of that, we're going to continue to have the same outcomes, which is 260 million answers. So I'm really excited about the use cases that we're seeing from our AI inventory of agencies thinking out across healthcare, the environment, really imaginative ways of using some of the basic AI that is now available in the market. But the future to me is really exciting. But we fully recognize that we need to have rules, regulations, and a framework so that we can operate really effectively in government.
That's helpful. That's helpful. I mean, look, I know that it's sticky, right? I mean, you've got legacy laws in place around data sovereignty and all kind of stuff that you have to weed through to get there. But that is fantastic to hear, and it's good to hear from a memory sake that you guys are leaning forward there as well. So I want to open it up to audience questions. I have a microphone set up over there. Don't feel like you have to do it. Just stand up, shout your question, and I'll repeat it here, and then we can go from there. Can you identify yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Sarah Marcel. I work for ET Dynamics based out of DC. So I love that you guys touched so much on customer experience, love that emphasis. I'm supporting the IRS now. We have obviously a large kind of external facing audience, and they're having some troubles kind of adopting and adapting some of the new regulations, such as phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. Some demographics just don't have the capacity to get it, but others just kind of don't see why they should change their rules. So do you have any guidance on how to kind of emphasize the importance of these things to the broader public? Yeah. Thanks.
So it's a long question.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll let you just kind of
Summarize
so
the question was about bringing people along on the journey to interact with security tools. Maybe if I simplify in that way, we have to meet people where they are. Right. The average American, reading level is in the 4th, 5th grade range. Right. So we have to design all of our tools and systems to be omni-channel so that there are still going to be people that are going to need to walk in. There's a lot of people that are going to need to call in. They might not be comfortable or they might not have mobile devices. Right. So we know that we can really accelerate our adoption of simple, safe, and secure tools by improving and meeting people where they are that are digital natives or digitally inclined. But we also will not ever stop trying to make sure that we go that last mile and meet the public where they are and provide them. They might not want to interact, they might want to interact in person, and they might want to interact with a human on the phone to verify, to be able to use some of these other tools. So we're really thinking of it as fully omni-channel, but we know we can accelerate and take an enormous amount of volume and friction out of the system by modernizing, taking, I think a use case I had was a call center where we were able to take 65% of the calls out of the queue by resetting, being able to give you a self-service way to change your password. Right. And so then the volume that's coming into the call center can actually be some of those harder use cases where someone is just not able to use technology in the same way that maybe some of the folks in the audience are.
Yeah, and I mean, on that specific use case, right? Like, I mean, bottom line is we have to get the phishing resistant MFA because their stuff's getting broken. So it's really that simple. But like, it's obviously really hard. This is the culture change that I was referencing earlier. I think a lot of times you got to like work to educate the business owners, application owners, and kind of the mission side, help them understand that like this is a risk to them delivering on their mission, right? It's a risk to their completely losing the trust of the American public. It's like there's risks they definitely understand and think about and care about every day. You should find a way to translate the fact that like if you don't do that, if you can't help us like work through that cultural journey with the team and sort of not accept this legacy thinking of like it's too hard, it's too disruptive. We've had an exception for 10 years. Can't we just continue to? It's like, no, because our adversaries have gotten a lot better in the past 10 years. And if we stay static and still, it's just literally handing keys. And like being that direct about it. It's kind of, we have that, I've been pretty direct up here. I have to be. Like if the federal CISO can't say like, we're accepting some massive risks by not doing these things, and like who's going to? But everybody sort of has to be willing to understand that that is a true statement. And I think use cases about incidents at companies and other places where things can go really bad sometimes helps sort of, or testimonials, having people come in, I found is really helpful. Like having like a CEO or senior executive from a company that had a very public and very bad breach, and having them come in and sit down with the executives in an agency, just explain to them like the experience, like how it felt on day zero, on moment zero, and then the first 24, 48 hours of that, and then the long tail. That I found is because you're connecting at a business level. Because like if you don't get there, it's really hard to manage the change of the people below at kind of the operating level. Those just continue to sort of exist, I think. And it's just a reality of it. It's hard.
Other questions?
Claire, really appreciated your remarks on AI, but interested to hear sort of how you envision your role and maybe Chris's role in increasing sort of like the baseline understanding and discourse of policymakers on AI. I mean, we had a meeting last week with an unnamed member of Congress who said he's been learning about AI through the New York Post. And you've seen that, we know there's HISGAC and House Oversight is interested in doing hearings. We're not getting a lot from that. So just interested to hear sort of how you envision your role in elevating this conversation.
So what's the role of federal CIO in helping educate or inform or create a dialogue with other policymakers to include the legislature?
Yeah, I think it is an absolutely mission critical part of our jobs to make sure that people are understanding the operating environment, and this is something that we do across the entire executive branch. This is not a single person's job. This is all of our jobs to be able to lift the boats and educate. And I think Chris's use case just a minute ago was a really good example of bringing in people, from outside the government that are able to share experiences. For us to be able to simplify some technology. Oftentimes when we are, you walk into the room as a technologist and the first thing that senior leaders say is, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Like I'm not the technical person. It is incumbent upon all of us to raise people's understanding in simple ways, which is the hardest. Right. It is what my background is healthcare technology and, being able to take clinical outcomes and reduce them to patient measurements is really important. But when you're bringing user stories in and able to share experiences, I think that is the most profound way that you can raise people's knowledge level. But I think this is something we're going to all be chasing after for quite some time, because the stories about AI are way out in front of people's ability to apply it to their daily life and understand the threat landscape related to it. And I think it's just going to be confusing, but incumbent on all of us to keep trying to drive those conversations.
Yeah, and inside the White House structure, like there isn't a component that isn't focused on this in some way. National Security Council, Economic Council, Domestic Policy Council, Science Technology Policy, our office. Just go through the list. Everybody's got some piece of this. They're super ultra focused on it, and we're coordinating forward point. But look, I mean, there's going to be stories and things that are leading on this. That I mean, out here, I've been left with more questions than answers from folks here who are like the AI experts. So I don't really know what to do about that other than continue to get educated and ensure that we continue to move as fast as we are to develop the right policy approach to everything and work in a responsible manner with Congress to do that. And that's where we're focused. But right, like I'm not sure who's got these clear answers yet, period, to be honest with you. And if you know who they are, I'm out here for another 2 days and I would love to find some coffee time.
Other questions? So I have a couple from online. One, the first one is for Claire, going back to the comments around the M side and B side collaboration. Can you give an example of how you have ushered in a new way of working together?
Yeah, I think the budget example for the last budget cycle for FY24 is a really wonderful example. We were in the room having the conversations, working collaboratively. One of our RMO colleagues is actually here with us today. And I think that really reflects the kind of relationship that we're developing in our office across OMB. And then continuing to have the voice of the CIO and the CISO community that we hear from every single day and work with every day, to be able to bridge some of those gaps is really the most important way. Also, the frameworks of the presidential management agenda and some of these other frameworks, I think, are driving that collaboration across the M side for management. Also, workforce is really incredible and incredibly important. Talent is incredibly important. And so making sure that all of the activities related to that also translate across our budget teams as well. So I think that's some of the collaboration that you see at OMB.
Sure. And the person who asked that question must be in Washington, D.C.
Yes. Go ahead.
Hello, Evgeny Jervis, Take Logic. Thank you so much for being here. Chris, as someone who spent 20 years in software security, I definitely share your excitement about memory safe languages and having discussion
right.
at this level.
There's two of us.
So I'm curious, in the world of cryptographic implementations, obviously the use of memory unsafe languages has created more than a few problems over the years. So I'm just kind of curious, as we think about quantum migration, the migration to kind of quantum resistant algorithms, are you going to advocate for, or perhaps require, use of memory safe languages to implement these?
It's a great question. I'm going to dance around the circles on it.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, the question is like, as we're moving towards post-quantum policy development and requirements, are we going to mandate the use of memory safe languages? I mean, I certainly think that's a very good idea that we should be studying closely and are, right? I kind of have to leave it there. But I mean, but that's right though. I mean, like we're gonna, we're sort of in a stage for a lot of this stuff of like heavily encouraging, advocating, pushing, and then eventually with the right stage, a lot of these things we're talking about kind of, may be appropriate to be requirements. But we're very careful about requirements. I mean, we enforce requirements lots of different ways. most prominently, is in contract terms. And you have to be like explicitly correct and precise there. And also when you get to that point of like enforcement of requirements, you need to understand the readiness level of everyone to achieve it, or you can have some really bad policy or some really hard problems. And so I think like we're on that path of, and we're doing a lot. We have other folks here sitting in front of you. Nick is working a lot on our post-quantum preparedness and readiness. And so like that's definitely on top of mind for us. Appreciate you raising it.
All right, so the last question. Oh, all right. So we got what 1, 2, and then I've actually got one on the line that's going to help us transition to the next one.
Hi, Jill Shapiro with Tenable. It's Steve today. I am curious, adding on yet another thing, how what your role is in the implementation of the climate security plan.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
As the dual hats, I suppose. Well, so Claire and I and our team, the OMB side, we spend a lot of time with the writing team for the most probably the federal section of that. But lots of other pieces work for us, right? We were kind of ingrained throughout. And there's what I can say about the next set of strategies. There's actually going to be a very robust implementation plan that's public facing. Okay, so like here to make that commitment, and exactly when we'll deliver that, or when the ONCD side of me will deliver that, we're probably looking at like early summer. And we've got some big tasks and actions in the federal section. There's working with CISO to like really flesh out the next phase, like operational implementation of our model. And it's kind of like a big esoteric thing to say, but like we didn't want to write another federal strategy on the heels of this. We spent a lot of time writing strategy. We want to get to the next layer of like, okay, shared services, like can we do more? Like everything that we've been working on, can we get it tighter? Can we articulate that in some better way? Is there something new we need to create? Study that and just really make the model that we have that we think's working, like I described the MSSP type role for systems, it's like operationalize it a bit more and make it more concrete on paper. So this is one task. And then we have another really big longer tail of let's develop an IT modernization strategy for federal government. This is one Claire's like kind of the point is that if the technology can't implement zero trust principles into, then it shouldn't be like driving on the road. and then it's going to need a really, really good business case, an exception case that we've got to like build from that starting point, not like because it's had an exception for 20 years, and this 10-year plan, it's going to intersect, I think, with like PQC, because there's going to be drivers and things that may like help reinforce and push that modernization faster through sheer like need of we'll lose everything we have of value to our adversaries. So like, let's move faster. And so I think there's going to be a lot of like tie-ins and connections to all that, but like that gets into the implementation side of the national cyber strategy. And then in my dual have a lot of sort of involved in kind of more of it, but I don't have to say.
No.
Yeah.
You want to go last? Okay. So the question online that I got is, we as industry are often, I'm paraphrasing here. We in industry are often not just selling into and working with the agencies in the federal civilian. We're also working with DoD. We're also working with the states, and we're also working internationally. So can you help us understand first and foremost, how are you guys coordinating policy across the Department of Defense? Because that's a big one. And then the other two were internationally, what are you guys doing outreach, and then state and local as well. So that was the broad question.
The 3 questions. We start with the DoD work that we're doing. Yeah. So Claire and I've been heavily, particularly on the cybersecurity end, which is I think where there's a lot of need for harmonization of requirements and like harmonization of effort. And as we all ran out in zero trust, like we have slightly different implementation plans of zero trust, all built in the same frameworks. But the risk of that is like you could have potentially disparate requirements for basically the same end goals. So like we're tuned to the risk. And I just say that, Claire and I met with John Roccasone and our counterparts, Rob Joyce, and the CIOs of DNI and DoD, and like we're constantly kind of getting together and just making sure that like we're at least being personal, intentional, having our teams do regular cross branch sort of collaboration over zero trust implementation, or whatever it is, it's secure software. And also recently, I was asked to join as a tri-chair of the Committee on National Security Systems to ensure that we have alignment there. It's another area because national security systems are strewn about. I see Department of Defense and actually federal civilian. And those are like really, really critical systems, and we want to ensure we have alignment. So it's just, I don't know, we're doing a lot on that one. I don't know, international, state, like there's plenty we're doing, but I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I think we are working and learning from international partners. I mean, that is an ongoing part of what we do. Service delivery happens at the state and local level. And that is also something that we both contemplate, take into consideration, and try and work collaboratively on.
Go back.
Yeah, sure. So Steve Kovac, Chair of the thank you all. Thank you both for being so open to the industry. It's been breath of fresh air having that to all of us, just across the board. As Steve Kovac from Zscaler, different question. So I kind of been teeing up this cloak and dagger dark room. You guys put your robes on, go in and shut the door, and a year later, one thing. And so, we've been frustrated a few times over the last year. We've been part of helping an agency in Iraq, 3 agencies, back help them. Then, a long time getting their approved, simply to have purchasing go in and buy least cost, technically capable least cost solution. And it just completely, we spent a year with the rigors of TMF. You know how big some of these are. I didn't talk about it. That's a pretty tough blow.
Yeah.
How do you guys, I know you can't tell people how to get time from, but how do you make sure they stick with the recommendation that you guys agree? Because I've seen 3 very clear ones where that left the right people when in a purchasing came out the wrong way. And how do you stop that from happening? Secondly, to that is, how do we learn more about what happens in that cloak and dagger? Because it seems that that's what's the biggest kept secrets in the industry. What happens? So that's my question.
Let me paraphrase. Go back. So kick me later. But one, TMF obviously has a board. How do folks from the outside looking in get a little bit more visibility to the process of awarding TMF and the working from TMF? And the other question is, if you make a recommendation to an agency, how do you ensure that where does the purchasing decision power fall, and who owns that, and how are you guys part of it or not part of it?
I think to add to the cloak and dagger, you forgot the powdered wigs that we wear during our deliberation period. But what we try to focus on for the interrogation we do as a board, right? We're kind of like a venture, right? Like we're operating in a really similar model. We're trying to figure out, are the dollars that we're going to invest able to be delivered at the agency level? So I think the specifics of, we are not investing in hardware or software, right? We are investing in an agency going on a journey, and we have to rely on the agency to be able to execute with excellence. So whether that is, having full stack leadership support, making sure the CFO and the agency leadership believes that this is the right TMF proposal, making sure that they have staff that is actually going to be committed to the project and able to manage it within the portfolio that they already have. When you get into acquisition and procurement, that is a dependency on the agency level, right? That they are working collaboratively with their CIO team and making the best investment for their enterprise and their enterprise architecture. So we don't tend to go that deep, but we do ask an enormous amount of questions about procurement and acquisition and the strategy and the capabilities at the agency, because that is where projects fall down. Right, is we don't want to give out money and then the procurement's going to start and it's going to take 18 months and, like we're burning the clock. So we do focus on that, but your specific use case, I don't think I can answer honestly that we're at that level of specificity with every, specific investment.
Well, thank you guys for your time. We're gonna transition to our industry panel. We'd love for you guys, if you can stick around for a little bit and listen to some of the stuff that we've got great representation from ABI. We've got the CEO of Virtru who's coming up here, and we've got Rob Riegle, who's helping sponsor this event as well, come up and talk a little bit from different perspectives. So thank you guys for.
Can I add one thing?
Oh, sure, sure.
I just want to add in closing, thank you all for your partnership in working with the federal government. I know sometimes we're hard and it's a little challenging, but we are so grateful for our private sector partners and all of your continued work supporting all of our missions. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all of you and just say thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Hey, what's going on? It's Steve. How are you? Too. Good. Good. Yeah, busy. As are you. I know. But it's
Yes.
a really thing past few quarters. So
Yes.
I would love to connect on.
Good. Yeah.
Well,
You know where to find us.
I sure do. I sure do. All right. See you.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I mean.
So I'm not the one.
There you go.
Thanks. I wanted to talk about it, but like, it's, administrator put it up yesterday.
Here, I'll
Tried really hard.
put your number.
Frankly, the national security. Fast track, right? Supposed to, even though like the rich, like, we're having problems. I'm like, we haven't just like say it's national security, it's unreformed. We have not, like, no, I can't do that. I just know what it is. Maybe another option?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go with that. Don't get too frustrated. Don't be against it. I do. Okay. Yeah, one thing I can do.
You want me to stick to
3 seconds.
Ross?
Data filler.
You want me to stick to?
Hi, folks. Just if you bear with us 1 minute, we're transitioning to the next panel discussion. So just bear with us for 1 minute. Thank you very much.
You want me to stick to inbound time?
Yeah. I love your. Right back. And I tonight. Oh, great.
Yeah.
We'll see. We're trying to get to our end.
No, it's totally fine.
Is that one on? Okay. Okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Close enough? Technically, yeah. Okay. We'll go with that. So first of all, again, thanks to everyone, and really appreciate VMware and Workday sponsoring the event here for ADI. I'm Grant Schneider with the Alliance for Digital Innovation, joined by Rob Riegle and John Ackerly. And we're just want to chat a little bit, react a little bit to what Chris and Claire talked about. I've got some questions, happy to take some questions from the audience, but I want to start with, if you can just each introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your organization, kind of how you support the federal government, and help really meet some of those mission requirements that Chris and Claire just talked about, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Yeah, so Robert Riegle, I lead the U.S. federal solutions sales architecture team for VMware. Have been supporting the U.S. federal government, I guess, for 20 plus years now. Not to date myself, but I guess I'm a little older. Starting as a U.S. military coming out of high school. And, first, I would say, for those, I always like to make a plug for young folks that are listening. I mean, you can make a career out of helping, and serving the United States government. And there is no better way to, frankly, to spend your time than, really bringing to light what, Claire and Chris and many others have talked about with a public private partnership and others. So feel free to reach out to any member company of ADI, and we can help steer you, in the right direction. With that, I also have responsibility for helping our global public sector, really face some of the pacing challenges that our threat actors and nations are looming on the U.S. government. And so I spend a lot of my time working with the Department of Defense, the national intelligence community, and many of the different agencies that make up the civilian business. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand it to John.
Awesome. Great. So then thank you very much, Grant, and to the entire ADI team. Your work is extremely important in terms of bringing innovation into the federal government. I'm John Ackerly, co-founder, CEO of Virtru. We've been supporting the federal government since day one, back in 2012. We are a data-centric security company. I think we complement your work well in terms of your fantastic work from a cloud and a segmentation perspective. We really sit in the data pillar. So, really it's user experience being at the core of adoption for us. And it's, as opposed to this trade-off between privacy and convenience, or the responsibility to share and enforcing need to know, it's how do you actually enable both and be more operationally effective through the application of data-centric security. So we have 8,000 customers. So then commercially, JP Morgan, Verizon, Airbus, et cetera. Also Dr. Smile's dental practice that we're very proud of too, because it's all about ease of use and just having that security come along for the ride. In terms of our support for the federal government, it is split 50-50 between so then DoD and the IC. Really what's happening in terms of the need to collaborate and have trusted but verifiable southern relationships with coalition partners is becoming more and more important. You can do that by tagging and enforcing access control to your data, but always doing it in a seamless way. So really excited about this conversation.
Great. I appreciate that. And I want to start with the customer experience or digital experience that Claire talked about, because I think it's really important. And I think, the point she made that, if you're on a government website, you're trying to get something done, right? You're rarely there for entertainment. You're rarely there for any other reason. You want to get something done, and then you want to move on to, your professional, personal life as quickly as possible. So what are your thoughts as far as recommendations for the federal government on, how OMB can help prioritize the customer experience, the digital experience, how they can help implement some measures along those lines? We end up with a lot of compliance things, particularly around cybersecurity, that are maybe easy to measure, but often go against customer experience. And I'm curious what each of your thoughts are in this space.
Yeah, Grant, thanks. I think, this along with the AI conversation is really in its infancy. If you look at a lot of the, VMware certainly, and some of the ecosystem partners who we work with, the member companies of ADI, we're transitioning our businesses from being, a traditional sell it, put it in a data center and sort of leave it alone to, really meeting that size and scale of the US government anywhere in the world. And quite frankly, just had a business, a case study that I think will end up in Harvard Business Review in a few years in COVID to talk about what happens when people are home for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, and even things like kids in schools. And so I think it brings a whole new light to this customer experience, digital experience. So we feel very strongly that, across the pillars of zero trust, the customer side of it has to be, and I love the tagline, simple, safe, and secure, right? And realize that we're dealing with a very diverse population of people. And I do think that is one area where, again, I think the automation, the artificial intelligence engines can be extremely safe and easy to use and frankly applied quickly to help drive outcomes for citizens. And then those outcomes can then just help us all, whether it's pay our taxes, receive benefits, interact differently with whether it's the state government or the federal government side. And then as we do that as a nation, we restore some of the faith in our government services that maybe we've lost over the last years.
Yeah, so I think that is very well said. And when I think of customer experience, it's not just so the end customer, it's also the federal civilian workforce, and asking those very hardworking folks to make some of the decisions, take additional steps to then do the right thing every day in terms of securing data and systems is just challenging. And so I do think that automation and what we're seeing come out over the past few months has great potential. There have been data classification tools in kind of my world for the longest time that just end up not being deployed effectively. And so I think from a customer experience, ultimately the end customer is the American public. But if we can serve the federal civilian workforce with easy to use tools, that also moves the ball forward in a big way. I have all kinds of, so then as a reform policy guy, I ran a technology policy pre and post September 11th. And, frankly, there is lots of progress, but we'll just say we have, and I will raise my hand as being part of it, but we have accepted prolonged failure on this point for a very long time. And we just see the ramifications of that come up again and again. And so I think forums like this and what we're seeing come out is an awareness of the end user. How do you make automatic decisions to help them do their jobs and protect our nation's secrets, which is a very recent example, is just paramount.
Could I have one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. I think you brought up a great point that just I'll quickly add on. I also think, very similar to security, this is an area, customer success is an area where, one company can't solve, right? I mean, it is an ecosystem, of companies that have to come together and drive standards and adoption and best practice sharing. And so I would encourage the governments and agencies to look for those opportunities, right? I think you were saying very, very well, that could be a very easy way for the government to make, big strides.
Yeah, and John, you brought up workforce, and so I wanted to ask about workforce because we're out here at RSA with, I don't know what the number is, 20,000 other cyber professionals. Some of them are probably looking for jobs. Some of them are here recruiting for other people looking for jobs. But we have workforce challenges, and we have workforce challenges in the federal government, and some of it are technologists in cybersecurity, and we need more people in these fields. But some of it, to the question earlier, we need other decision makers, whether they're acquisition professionals, policy professionals, budget professionals, to understand technology and to some degree. And we need to find ways to make technology easier so that they can work with it, so they can acquire it, because it really is the underpinnings of how federal agencies and how companies are getting their business done, right? We're getting our business done with technology tools as an amplifier in some way, shape, or form. So just curious on your thoughts of, what steps can the federal government take? What can industry take to alleviate that burden? Kind of thoughts on how we get at this challenge.
Yeah, I'll take it first. So I don't have the kind of old John Ackerly like specific policy answer. As a reform policy person, it's more how do you take a flamethrower to the whole system and kind of rebuild from the ground up? Not realistic, but I'll take a stab at it. And I'll just say from the perspective of the non-technical co-founder, my brother was at the NSA, a policy person, but he and the team at Virtru, they want to deploy code that actually gets implemented, and to recruit top engineers into the government, there's got to be a mechanism where they can see their work actually be impactful, and the private sector can partner to help enable that. But look, if I had a magic wand, I would basically recompete every 10-year contract. I would, as opposed to leading with process around RFPs, and where the large players have the skills and the workforce to really shape requirements, do bake-offs and have companies compete based on mission outcomes that are clearly articulated by the agencies at hand. And I think the conversation earlier around the technology modernization fund, I do think there, more transparency, more clarity on the specific outcomes that can, as opposed to working with agencies on an agency proposal to kind of give an opportunity to kind of compete, and the software that can be deployed the fastest, that can meet the kind of ease of use bar, have that be an iterative, quick process where you can get wins. I think the other challenge, and I think there's been a lot of progress here on the DoD side, you have AFWorks, you have DIU, you have a lot of mechanisms to do test and evaluation kind of projects. Getting into programs of record is how you actually make change, and it's incredibly difficult. And you have these mega multi-billion-dollar efforts to have a whole new secret rail network. These are huge, figure out a way to sort of do bite sizes along the way and get software deployed and fail forward. Because if you actually fail forward and you iterate, you actually solve problems faster.
Yeah, well said. A lot to unpack there. I think maybe just to build on a couple points we were sharing with Clare and Chris prior. I think first of all, cyber in the workforce isn't just a government issue. It's a global issue, right? It is a JP Morgan, Chase, Wells, you name it, all are going after and trying to find the latest, greatest talent of folks, whether they're coming out of research institutions or have been in the industry. And so I think first, there's an opportunity for the government to work with a lot of the FFRDCs, the federally funded research institutes like Georgia Tech, Carnegie Mellon, University of Texas, and build a program that says, hey, after your 4-year degree, much like, we're going to recruit you if you're a Pepsi or VMware or any others, the governments, and they do that. They do a lot of good recruiting there, but I think we can do better there and, show folks at a young age that there's a lot of really innovative, technologies and solutions in the government. And I think in industry, we're helping the government, break through and really use the latest technologies, which a lot of young folks are very interested. They want to program in the latest, code. They want to deliver the latest software releases, and they don't think of the government being that innovation engine. And I think we need to help them show that that's not true, right? VMware, we're very proud of the fact that we're doing a lot with software factories. That is a great example where the government and workforce, are coming together. Customer success. It's more than just delivering, an application. It's how we're delivering it and the outcome. And then maybe the other side of it, I think, comes down to, as a nation, and I think President Biden and the administration have taken a first step that we should continue. How do we invest, in our community colleges and different, certification tracks and other, and I think yesterday the cyber maturity model discussion with Stacy, that is an industrial base right question. If we're going to keep up with the pace of, of China and Russia and many of other, threat actors, it starts with, driving that the industrial based partnership with the government.
Yeah, it's very much a partnership. And speaking of the security piece, I wanted to touch on the Discord data breach, which was the National Guard person who posted the information recently, classified information about Ukraine and other items. And so John Sherman, the DoD CIO, recently issued a memo basically telling DoD elements to go, confirm compliance with existing, policies and procedures. And I imagine, or I will say that I think every single breach or cyber incident that I dealt with in the government was a known vulnerability that already had a known solution or patch that hadn't been implemented and was, and sometimes there were policy solutions that would have solved it, and sometimes there were technical solutions, and sometimes there was both, and neither happened to be in place, right? So, the concern with this is that we swing back towards a pre-9/11. We're going to lock down all the information. DoD's operating in a lot of cloud environments, and so, Rob, curious from your perspective, like what can DoD do to secure that information? And John, interested in kind of your take on how do we not swing that pendulum back to, sharing information is bad because someone's eventually going to do something wrong with it.
So it's interesting, and I'll broaden the question a little bit because I think it's not just DoD.
No,
Again, I think it's
their use case.
Federal government, state government. I mean, frankly, VMware just issued I'll call it an executive order, but a mandate that said, hey, don't put company sensitive information in GPT because it's captured. Well, I mean, I think we're all dealing with that, and Discord and many of the other tools. I think you have to find a way to utilize the tools that are available for good. And it comes through, really, we've done a good job of dealing with the technical debt. I think we've done a poor job of dealing with operational debt and cultural debt. And that comes through training, through enablement, through communication, and doing it in a smart and proactive way so that people can say, oh, yeah, maybe I didn't think of it being that, right? And sort of showing. As far as the cloud space, the cloud space is absolutely enabling, the government and many others to sort of skip that technical debt paradigm and jump directly into dealing with operational debt and innovation. But they're not doing it with the innovative cultural debt aspect, right? And so I think there's some aspects to learn there that cloud solves one part of the problem, but we still have to drive, again, the right enablement, the right, cultural changes, and that piece I think is still coming along.
Yes, and then very well said. And I think, for sure, culture is a big part of it. Grant, going back to us and how you began the question, and I may have gotten up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, but I saw that guidance. I should be a little careful, but I was kind of like, oh, here we go again, right? Pendulum swinging. Now it's all about least access privilege. Again, when I was in the White House 22 years ago, bad operational effectiveness when you're passing out or you were passing around a document with a series of red dots on it across all of the policy sort of departments in order to get a document to the Oval Office. And data was stuck in silos and dots were not being connected. So the responsibility to share was not being met. Fast forward to when my brother wasn't forward deployed in Iraq, Secretary Gates said, this is not working, fail open. So then literally USB drives into laptops in a skiff going into a Chinook helicopter to get the right data to the right person. Bad mission execution, really bad security. Chelsea Manning to Edward Snowden to then Jack Teixeira, they all had credentials, right? And so it's a culture problem. There is a technology component, and it's kind of what is old is kind of new again. It's okay, what classification does this person have? What program should they be a part of? Where are they in the world? And for what period of time should they have download access, read access? How should they be able to actually share that information? Actually, the technology is there. It's about how do you implement it? And I think one of the benefits of the Zero Trust framework is if you saw the identity pillar, which it is all about authorization. You combine that with the data pillar, how you describe, tag data, and obviously, invest in network security too. But you handle those two things, you actually solve a big part of the classified data issue. And today, in the COCOMs, at CENTCOM, at PACOM, they are deploying the advanced tier of the data center security in the Zero Trust framework right now because they know they've got to get their job done. So I think that the DoD, so then CIO, absolutely, batten down the hatches, I guess, and actually think about how you can accelerate from a 2037 timeframe to a today timeframe to actually deploy technology that can solve this problem. And it's a really big issue. It's been going on for 25 years. So now I will get off the old high horse, but it's a real opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be just to add one quick comment there. I do think if we swing too far, then we absolutely lose the advantage of diversity. And frankly, we spend a lot of time bringing in talent and folks that are super smart and super committed, and then we tell them they can only walk a step or two. They lose the ability to really take full advantage of their their intelligence and all the things. So it has to be a paradigm for sure. And I think we're still figuring it out, and an area for the ecosystem that works with the government to come together and help.
Yeah. Any final thoughts in general for the group on any topic?
Lots of sandwiches and yogurt and juice and coffee. We definitely really appreciate everybody being here. I think this is a great conference and a great forum for where we're going. And just for what it's worth, I mean, I think the threats, as we all know, we see are real. And that pacing threat of not only change, but how it's evolving and changing is an avenue for opportunity, an opportunity for us to come together. We're all in it to help our companies achieve success for sure. But in the public sector space, that element of serving, we have to have that right level of commitment as well. That the financial results will be there, but there's also an investment, whether you're building products or serving, right, where we come together and help shape this outcome. And thank you all for coming in today.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And just to kind of build on that, this is an incredible kind of moment of opportunity. And I think all of us in this room are blessed to have the opportunity to then have an impact. And actually the problems can be solved. It takes industry coming together. We had 2 more hours. We could talk about all the great work happening at NIST, open standards, open approach. But I do think industry is coming together, and there's great government leadership that's really focused on this issue. So thank you very much, and thank you, ADI.
Great. Well, again, I want to thank everyone online, everyone here in the audience for taking the time. We're really excited for ADI to be able to do this event from RSA. I really think it's important to keep this dialogue going. We're certainly going to follow up with OMB, obviously on behalf of the members and individually with members to help them solve some of the problems and the challenges that they put in front of us. So really appreciate it. Again, thank you to VMware. Thank you to Workday for sponsoring the event. Really excited to have it out here. Ross, anything you want to close us out with?
And thank you to Virtru.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Virtru. So with that, we will let everyone get back to their days, back to RSA, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.